Welcome to the Asset Owner Podcast. I'm Stuart, Group MD of the brand, and I'm joined by three legends. The first, you may know his voice, it's Guy Opperman. I'm not going to introduce you Guy as the former pensions minister. I'm going to introduce you as pensions guru. I think that's far more apt.
I'll take that.
And today we're also joined by David Harris of Tor Financial and Mike Ambery, Head of Retirement Savings at Standard Life. Welcome, gents.
Thank you, Stuart.
Thank you.
So we're gathered here today to talk about your trip to the US. So I just wonder if you can kick us off by actually telling us what it was like, boots on the ground, and what's going on in the US right now on retirement that we're not seeing here from the UK.
Mike, you first, please.
Yeah, okay. I'll take you back a little bit if it's okay. I'll take you away from the US. I'll take you to Paris. A year and a bit ago, where Department of Labour were at the OECD.
Correct.
David and I were in attendance. And the really focus there was on what is the appropriate asset allocation? What's the appropriate investment within asset-backed pensions? The focus being climate change. Should climate change, ESG, DE&I, be considerations, factors, or should they be key areas of main concern and main focus for investment? The Trump administration, I feel, through the Department of Labour, Justin Danhoff, really clear, could really understand their articulation on that to say, actually, investment in these areas are just factors. Stop honing in, stop focusing on these particular areas. There's analysis there of where we look at net zero, our intention to get into net zero. We've seen very recently Tony Blair, and Guy will definitely have an opinion on Tony Blair of whether that is a good area that we should be focused on our investments, and is it delivering investment performance and returns. Flip over, a year and a bit later, we go across to the US. The focus is still the same. Where are you invested, how you're invested, and let's bring in a few other key factors that the US is looking at. Private market solutions, allocation to public assets, and then how do you deliver, and this is the key fundamental, how do you deliver better returns? And I use that better returns, not better outcomes, how do you deliver better investment performance? Because that's what the consumers, the plan sponsors, and otherwise are trying to achieve in the US. There's parallels there to value for money, etc., etc. I could draw through adequacy, level of saving, and other areas which it'd be worth touching upon. But I think that will probably be the key focus point of what is investment in the US? How does it really laser into highest quality? What are the right asset classes? What's the right construction of that investment, and the level of choice being able to be given to consumers, plan sponsors, and the universe that consumes the largest assets under management in the world.
Yeah, and I think adding to Mike's commentary and Mike, a nice summation, is this fundamental concept that drove Guy as a pension minister was the sole purpose test. They are driven very clearly, like the laser focus, on maximising the rate of return for the member. And now you can argue to the cows come home, if you like, on whether that's ideal. But the reality is they see ESG and sustainability not being as part of that consideration. That means that those sort of offerings are getting away from what the plan was originally set up to do. Now, the point we did on Tuesday was we spoke in Des Moines, Iowa, with Senator Tom Harkin and the Harkin Institute, great guy, great hero of mine, and his view was very clear that Americans today, as in tomorrow, are worried about their retirement savings. Remember, only 50% of American workers are covered by 401ks. That's a low coverage. Compare it to Australia, 91% in superannuation. We're in the 70s with auto enrollment. That's the first key point. We then scroll down to Washington on Wednesday, didn't we, Mike? And when we were in the Hay Adams Hotel and looking on at a Prudential FT event, and again, this issue of adequacy and retirement adequacy was raised. But again, the sole purpose test. What are we seeking to do to maximise rates of return? Is the contribution rates there? They're not at 12% like you see on average in Australia and 3% on a voluntary basis. So the Americans are then confronted also finally by Social Security reform or Social Security. I spent part of my good life in the late 90s, last century, working on Social Security reform, carving out individual accounts to sustain Social Security. Social Security, as we know, will start to go unfunded very quickly in the next 10 years. And the question is, no politician is confronting, Stuart, this big elephant in the room. What do we do with Social Security, considering so many Americans rely on it? And Mike and I think we agreed, picked this up, this tension that exists between allowing people private markets, Bitcoin, private credit, and access to that through brokerage accounts, and the safe harbouring that the fiduciary or trustee will need. So that's probably a summation, Mike, of what we did. It was 48 hours, 72 hours of intensity, I think. But it was a great dialogue or exchange between UK, Australia, and what the hell was happening in the US.
Anything to add, Guy?
Well, I think for me, you see the American market as a fundamentally all about individual resilience. So you look at the stats, the 50% stat that David rightly cited, and it is very much a free market economy where everybody has to support themselves. It's not a state where the government, in the form of the Australian or the UK government, steps in and says we're going to mandatorily have auto-enrollment in some shape or form, right? So everybody is encouraged to get a 401k. And if you're going to have a free market economy, 50% is actually amazing, frankly, without any real nudges. But obviously, you've got 50% who are falling by the wayside. That's not a good situation. For me, you therefore have to ask whether individual resilience, a free market approach, is the long-term solution to the American situation. Given their dislike of the state in all its shapes and forms, Trump is the ultimate anti-state personification as a leader, then I don't really see that changing. And it's very much government for those who are going to take responsibility for themselves rather than government for the many in that respect. And certainly while the Republicans are in power, I don't see that changing. And if one was going to be critical of the Democrats and Obama and people like that, and Biden to a certain extent, it's that whilst they did do the Medicare reforms in healthcare, they didn't actually address, in reality, long-term pension saving as a solution to the problems that America has. So I don't really see that changing, and I don't see the Democrats necessarily going out on a limb. And one of the reasons you don't see that happening is, and it's the same problem we have in the UK, is that mandatory doing savings by an employer in some shape or form to the employee is expensive. And the problem in America is you have inflation rising, you have a general election they fought on, very famously, J.D. Vance used the line, this is an election fought on the price of eggs, right? And the price of eggs has gone up since Trump came into office. The key yardstick in America is the cost of gasoline, and that's gone above $4 a barrel. And I read only yesterday Trump saying, I don't really care about the November midterms. So slightly, it's very distorted from a solution-based economy that is there to enhance pension reform. They have amazing successes there, but it is very much the 50% who do have a 401k.
And I think maybe, Stuart, to add, there is a tension here about masculinity. And this is an interesting angle. There is clear evidence now that masculinity, young men that Trump's base, who did the flip in the elections, it was men under 30. It was the Latino base, and also it was women 48 to 60. But that masculinity with younger men are risk takers. And they are craving the Bitcoin. They are craving the private markets, the private credit access. And that's an interesting thing that Trump and his cabinet are responding to, is harnessing that base. Now, early polling has suggested, or what the Department of Labor that Mike and I have picked up is suggesting, is that this access is popular with some. The pragmatic sense that we all four of us have as experts is, how do you make it work? How do we make it work in a world that I would argue is a greater age of uncertainty that we've ever confronted? Let's be honest, it's Gulf War III at the moment, and we're not sure how this is going to fly out.
I was going to ask actually, what the impact of the Middle East has had on the backdrop of the reforms in the US.
So I was in the Middle East 3 weeks ago and spent some time in Qatar and in Saudi Arabia, and previously was in Bahrain and Doha again. It's a different, so the conflict is affecting different countries in different ways. So obviously the oil price has gone up, so those who have oil and can export it are doing well off the back of the conflict, frankly, because the revenues are coming in a greater way. Those who can't export it, for example, the Qataris have lost their capacity of many of their refineries, things like that, and who are reliant on a tourist-based economy, those economies are struggling. You would say probably short term, Qatar has got 500 years of gas there. They're pretty good for the longer term. I think the impact is then felt in, obviously, UK, European, Western world, African, Asian economies. We are living off reserves of oil and gas at the present stage, because even if the conflict stopped tomorrow, we would have at least 9 months of impact in terms of supply. Now that, my farmers in Northumberland who are mates of mine will tell you that, fertilizer has doubled, red diesel has doubled, heating oil has trebled. These are massive increases in expenditure for the bottom line. You look at the US at the moment, because they're energy secure, they don't seem to be that fussed about it. And I think they are, of all the economies on the planet, they're the ones who are least affected by the Iran conflict, which is kind of why Trump doesn't really mind it going on for a period of time. The difficulty is, though, that if the global economy slows, then that inevitably is going to affect all particular countries. The rising tide lifts all boats. The falling tide also lets all boats go down. So I don't see a fundamental impact at the moment, but it probably will impact in the midterms, and it definitely will impact in the next general election in the US.
Mike.
I'll probably take it from a very narrow lens rather than the US lens, the UK lens. What does it mean for geopolitical uncertainty? Is a couple of things, behavioural and financial, as two common areas. Behavioural, I'll let anyone else talk about that for all they want and what's the connotations of that. The financial, what does it mean to an everyday consumer and to employers within the UK? Two things. Cost of living is just going up. Energy pricing is due to go up by double digits later on during the year. Households in the UK cannot afford to save more and need to consider how they live in an inflationary environment that is ever more increasing, yet salaries are probably not going up at the same rate. So it's being impacted by everyday workers where they have work in that particular lens. I'll also bring through that lens. We've got areas of unemployment now. We've got the youth generation. We've got 1 in 6 of today's youth unable to enter the workforce. There's not enough jobs to go around. That means those individuals aren't going to have a job. They're all equally not saving for their future at the same amount of time as well. Compound that with financial situations and otherwise. So, as Guy said, do you know what? If you're invested and you're invested in the stock market, you're not having that bad a day, depending where your money is invested and in what asset classes and commodities. So there's areas there of how you're invested, what period you're invested, and then choosing your attitude to risk, which is an attitude to volatility in geopolitical circumstances there. So I'd probably say for those people that are invested and a long way from retirement, looking at their portfolios, considering what those portfolios look like in more volatile environments is actually something that should be considered. And for larger scale asset owners, is considering what that looks like on a global basis. Is there a reposition out of this uncertainty, if David wants to term it Gulf War 3 or Iran versus Israel v US or whatever terminology we want to use for that? I think there's a positioning basis thereof. Where should money be invested?
I think there's also a worry for me, which is on any metric, you look at the global stock market, it looks very toppy. However you dress it up, there's a reason the price of gold is so high, all right, there's an awful lot of people going to safe havens. And the stock market boom that we have consistently enjoyed for a very, very, very long period of time just doesn't look sustainable to me in the longer term. And I don't know what will cause the corrections and how bad the corrections will be, but I can't get away from the fact that there's a correction coming. Now, Mike is totally right. If you're invested for the long term, if you're in a DC master trust who's, looking on 20, 30, 40-year timelines, I'd be intensely relaxed personally. Obviously, if you're in a DB situation in the UK, I'd be slightly less relaxed. But genuinely, that is the one problem. And you look at the Iran conflict and you look at the impact on America and the difficulties that they're having in terms of inflation and cost of living increases and the sort of AI bubble that they're involved in. And you think this is just not sustainable. And if that does topple over or take some significant market correction, as has happened in previous times, 2008, early 2000s, 1992, et cetera, then we are looking at a world of problems.
Sure. I use the term wisely. I think Gulf War III, we can go back to the early 90s with George H. Bush and where he sustained or allowed Saddam to stay in power, right through to the Second War with his son, and then that lingered on with uncertainty in the region. Three things will practically happen, and the gentleman have alluded to it. One is the uncertainty in the stock markets. Oil prices go down in response to seeing positiveness of what the Trump administration is saying about peace settlement. But the peace settlement's been flip-flopping. Since Saturday, there's been peace, there's been no peace, there's been uncertain peace. Some of his senators are saying a weak decision. So there's a political paradigm to consider. So the stock market is moving. Second point, which is fair, is the uncertainty in the region itself. Guys talked about it. Where are the economies going to go? And they can bounce back, but it's going to take time. Fertilizers, let's face it, yields on certain crops around the world are not going to be as good because fertilizer is not going to be displaced as much, and especially after Ukraine. Third point, which hasn't been really reconciled in this country, is what is going to be those sovereign wealth funds from the region doing with their assets in the UK. There is a view that they're going to withdraw back. They need that money back to rebuild. Yeah. And that's a real frightening prospect potentially for the UK. But having seen the interim pension commission report come out, and I've labelled it as light and fluffy, if anybody who's seriously thinking that the Chancellor is going to put out auto-enrolment contribution rates for 8 to 12% in this environment, I'll go on the record and say they're either having a stroke or they're on drugs, because it just won't happen, because what Chancellor is going to withdraw that money? So all those industry participants and others who are agitating for 12%, good luck. I'm sad to say it's a lost decade.
Well, I think, listen, on the 12% point, I always draw the example of the Australians, which is, the best example of a successful DC master trust system.
Thank you.
They are a fully fledged 34-year-old now, okay? They've been going since 1992. We are a 13 to 14-year-old in this country. And they only got to 12% on the 1st of July 2025. So it took them 33 years to get to 12%. We're actually going to get there much faster. So if genuinely, we're now in May 2026, if we were at 12% by May 36, that would be way faster than the Australians and would actually be a fantastic achievement. That's not unrealistic as a timeline, but the idea that we're going to do it this decade is just for the birds.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'd probably go from US. Let's go back to US just for a moment. Guy's absolutely right, as he always is, about defaulting. No one in the world more than someone from the US will be told what to do. Guarantee you. You go to Texas and tell someone what to do, they'll let you know then. Carrying a concealed...
In robust terms, yes.
Many are carrying a concealed weapon, and we'll explain that to you backwards. But in terms of that, Americans change some of the terminology there. Automatic. So what can we automatically do? What can plan sponsors do? 1 point. Second point, what can governments do? What can the Trump administration do to incentivise plan sponsors to place people into pension and healthcare benefits and fund for them and consider these are the good options and this is how to utilise your remuneration. Parallel that with exactly what we've been speaking about from a moment or two. Firstly, light and fluffy is how I like my bakery products. My pension commission interim reports, I do like to have some solid substance in there as well. I do think there's some solid substance in there, but how do we build upon what we might term automatic enrolment or saving or otherwise? How do we, as a UK government, incentivise that and make that attractive? The second point, as we just raised, the cost of living is impacting individuals. Individuals generally within the UK don't have the ability to dip in their pocket to do anything. They look to their employer to consider what's the art of the possible. Where David rightly takes praise for the entire country of Australia, they did get that right by consensus in the early 1990s, a bit of a brainchild there. That is the one area that I think in a Trump administration, a truth social liking for Australia, what he means is a system that encourages and incentivises and automatically does it, and dare I say, and we'll come on to asking Guy what he would do as Donald Trump at some point, but how do we actually do that and move forward meaningfully as opposed to wait a little bit? We understand where we are. We understand self-employed individuals. Great stat out of the interim report, 4% saving for the retirement. There's a huge swathe, millions of populations that are missing out on contributions. When we get to the 2050s, we have over 50% of the UK population not saving adequately for their retirement. The ticking time bomb that I think everyone around this table, probably the majority of people listening in, have said, we knew about this. We've known about it for 10, 20 years. The reforming the band the same way Oasis reformed, great, let's get the gig out there. The band's reformed, it's got some good music, it's got some good tunes. Let's get on the stadium tour and do something. I have a fear that the stadium tour is going to be planned for the mid-2030s, and we've lost a further 5, 10 years.
It comes back to that, we've talked about it before, haven't we, that pace. I mean, the Pension Commission ambition was 2 years, I think, and there's a lot of talking, isn't there, in the UK? Whereas actually when the US does decide to do something, certainly under this administration, it kind of goes and does it.
Yeah. And that's admired, Stuart. And I can't stress enough. Mike and I picked that up, is that I look at the poll numbers and how surveys are coming through politically, and what Americans like about the Trump administration is that when Trump says he's going to do something, he's going to have a go at doing it. He's not going to be a bedwetter and worry about it. There's a lot of bedwetting going around in this fair country about private markets and infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. The United States is moving past that. They're saying people should have access. Now, we can debate whether we wring our hands and VFM and compare. The reality is, and these gentlemen will hopefully back me up, is the trustee in this country has to make calls shortly. And whether do you provide them with safe harboring on Bitcoin and other alternatives? Is it too risky? Fine. But the Americans are going down that path, because isn't it clear that Chancellor Reeves is looking for funds to invest in industries to stimulate employment so this economy grows? And she sees pension sector broadly as that jar of honey. How you square that is going to be the challenge. I'm sure our speakers have got.
If I come in with that, David, I think let's not beat ourselves up in the UK. We are actually pretty good at a lot of things. We should be proud of what we.
Just not cricket.
We'll ignore the long form of cricket for a time. What are we actually really good at? When we make decisions and having conviction, we're very good at that. We're good at innovation. We're good at technology. We're good at governance. We're good at actually thinking and bringing things together and putting them. That's the key thing. We need to make sure we double down on what we're really good at and move forward. And I'll come to Guy in a moment or two, because I'm going to ask him the question of where we're really good. Why? What's the impediment? Is it regulatory? Is it government? Is it, what's the energy levels? Because I feel we've got the energy. As I look at the asset solutions that we've got, particularly in DC markets, maybe in DB markets as well, we have the ability, we have a huge amount of money to be able to stimulate the economy where driven in the right areas. So whether it's private market solutions, what's the right asset classes, what's the right level of investment, private credit, private debt, the ability to be able to do that locally within the UK and globally is an asset that we should be utilising internally, domestically, to stimulate, strengthen our economy, and externally, like Australia does, export that wealth to develop and take opportunity for better growth for pension fund members. So I do think we're good at that. We're equally good at automatic enrolment. Was a huge success, got millions of people saving in the right area. I think the general consumer doesn't know where they're saving. I think they equally don't know what they're getting at the point of retirement. There's areas of builds that we need to build in now, which is there's a trust. Another good thing by Australia, VFM, performance ratings, metrics. What does saving actually look like into the right defaults? Having courage and conviction to consolidate into those defaults and, like Australia, to go at them into scale. Then to build what the solution actually looks like. A consumer that just thinks, like my mum or my dad, when they retired, they get given an amount of money at the point of retirement. That's all individuals wish to know. Have I got an amount of money? Do I have my ability to choose that amount of money and how I want to take that amount of money? And the underlying guarantee of what does the state give me? What's the income replacement rate? How long is that going to be around for? What does indexation look like? All really good political issues. But I will double down. We are really good in the UK so long as we get the consensus of a simplified approach to move forward. The one thing that we can't do is delay decisions too long, which constrains our ability to be amazing globally to something else. But Guy.
So, like many others, I read the 5,000-word essay written by Tony Blair and published earlier this week, and it draws really interesting contrasts between the Trump approach and the UK approach. And there's one particular section that he talks about where problems in government are like when you face a wall. And he described how the UK, basically, when you hit a roadblock or a wall, we will either stop and reverse, or we'll sort of think about it for about 2 years on the wrong side of the wall, and then maybe try and work around, and basically things get bogged down. As a minister for the best part of 12 years in government, I saw this on a repeat basis. He then describes very eloquently how the American approach, particularly with Trump, is when he sees the wall, he actually puts his foot down and smashes through it. And the best example I can give you is literally 5 days ago when Trump signed 4 executive orders on nuclear power stations and small modular reactors that basically say, A, there will be significant public subsidy, B, the rules and regulations will be, I'll not say scrapped, but massively reduced, and the time frame is massively accelerated, and that he expects them to be built within months, not years. Now, compare that to the UK. I was one of the ministers who signed off Hinkley Point, still not built, has a very impressive fish pass that's cost us a lot of money, and you have a situation that we're just really, really slow at producing decisions by government when you've gone through civil service, consultation, multiple quangos, multiple third-party sector organisations who are positively invested by blocking certain decisions. And as a minister, you see that all the time. Famously, I asked to be my get-out-of-jail-free card from Rishi Sunak when I went to see him in the summer of 2023 and said, look, I'd quite like to do one other job in my time in government. And I went to see him about 2 particular jobs, one of which was to be the transport minister in charge of roads, airports, buses, cycling, and a whole bunch of other stuff. And he gave me that job. There was another job that was one of 2 jobs I asked to do. And he very sweetly said, yes, go and do this. And by the way, here's a bunch of money from HS2, which we've just cancelled. Go forth and do stuff with it. I then tempted to spend well over £25 billion worth of taxpayers' money and built virtually not a single road, because we were bogged down in climate change litigation. We were bogged down in multiple reconsultations on multiple roads from the A47 to the A1 to, I could list them endlessly. And I came away with the conclusion that the government is not broke in this country, but it needs substantial reform. And Trump is clearly a very colourful character and not everybody's cup of tea, and probably is not the person who you'd want to be dating your younger sister. But bluntly, he crashes through the wall of problems, and that is very admired by his voters. There's no doubt whatsoever. Now, does he break eggs, damage egos occasionally, and it's pretty clear breaks the law in some occasions? Yes, he certainly does, and that's not an endorsement of that. But there's no doubt that the voters in the US admire that uncompromising approach. And when I look at the Pensions Commission, to bring it back to the question here, I look at it and I think, we're not going to do this in 2 years. There's no way, I can assure you, that government is going to receive the Pensions Commission and then act on it this side of the next general election on the 1st of May 2029, unless Burnham wins and goes early. So there's no chance that we'll take any decision on the Pensions Commission before 2030 at best, probably 31, 32. So I don't really see any action as a result of that. I don't see a new Pensions Act this Parliament. It's very hard to get more than one Pensions Act in a Parliament. But the government has one thing on its books that it could do literally tomorrow. So it took us ages to get the 2017 automatic enrolment review past Treasury, and Rishi allowed me to put it into law. They could do the enacting legislation literally by secondary ledge within weeks, right? They don't need to reconsult. They don't need to do anything else. Interestingly, the Pension Commission is pretty silent on that. It would obviously give the first pound, and it would obviously lower the threshold, and it would be massively increase the savings to red wall, female voters, low-income voters, all of the people that, frankly, the Labour government should be looking after best. And the fact they're silent on that, it just seems to me is that, yes, doing a pension commission is a good idea. I don't dispute that. But A, it's not going to happen in a while, and B, they seem to be engaged in particular pet projects of the three leaders of the pensions commissions and not actually saying, we've got legislation we could do right now. And that would sadly make a big difference as well.
And I think I'm sympathetic to that. I think I wanted to pick up on a couple of points the learned gentleman had raised. Look, the facts are, Stuart, that Tony Blair raised the issue that the UK policy needs to be refined. And somehow we need to look at this clearly. I'll give you an example. Net zero, carbon. Blair says there's oil and gas in the North Sea, go get it. Echoes what Trump's saying. At the same time, candidates, people in government don't want that touched. Now, in the United States, as we discovered with Mike and I, it's very clear. Fracking, gas, energy self-sufficiency is key. So we've got entities here, government arm's length entity, who believes in net carbon zero, but yet has got investments in Australia where they dig king coal up and oil. So how do you square that circle? That's the first book, energy security. And we're seeing that with bills rising. Secondly, are we happy that the coverage level of this country is around 71, 72%? In Australia, it's 91%. People say, well, we've done very well. But don't we want to take that up? And more importantly, what we did in Australia was get the threshold down to $1. You earn $1 in Australia, your employer puts 12 pennies, 12 cents into your individual retirement account. And what Guy's raises is the allure. But the Americans are doing something further. They're saying chase the returns on assets that are generating the highest rates of return. We've already seen law cases unfold last year in North Texas where judges, sympathetic to the Republican cause, have said to the fund managers, you're not here to justify your status by pushing a mantra of sustainability and solving climate change. You're here to generate and solve the member for maximising rates of return. And that's very much embraced, I think, Mike, you'd have to say, by the Department of Labour. They can't use ESG. The term ESG is gone. Sustainability.
Yeah, they might use the words resilience planning, but clearly BlackRock US or Goldman Sachs US is a very different organisation to Goldman Sachs or BlackRock UK.
And we do hear this is an anti ESG agenda from the US. But listening to you guys today, I mean, energy security, food security are two huge things that have been impacted by the crisis in the Middle East. You know, do those then become sexy investments? Because the answers to those are often sustainability, you know, some form of product that is actually utilizing natural resources like the sun, and creating fertilizer to feed people.
Yeah,
You know,
I mean, you're going to get more people investing in things like solar. You're going to get offsetting in forestry. You can see that in Northumberland on a regular basis at the present stage. Massive issues on grid connection on solar. And clearly that those sort of investments are going to take place. As always, big style investors will be, you know, BP used to be massive investors in this through Lightsource. They've now pulled away from that and gone back to oil and gas. So there will be investment, but it's not necessarily going to become a sexy investment, in my view. And the margins on farming, for example, are still very tight. There's no doubt whatsoever. We're very much controlled by the supermarkets. You know, the price of milk has descended massively over the last 20 to 30 years, merely because it's driven down on the back of productivity increases, but supermarket pricing. Now, so I don't see that sort of investment necessarily happening as such. I do see that the sort of, in this country, we are going to change our views on energy security. I think Blair, again, his very strong message that I believe in climate change, but just not yet. That, you know, it's like chastity, but just not yet. Means basically there is massive pressure to extract from Rosebank and the other oil wells in the North Sea the oil and gas that we actually do have, which would have an impact on this country. Now, my personal view is that within 6 months, the Labour government will have changed their views on oil and gas in the North Sea. And I suspect Miliband will be sidelined because the cost of energy is going to rise dramatically on the back of the Iran war. And the fact that we have homegrown oil and gas, it is an unanswerable question why we're not utilising that. And I think, sadly, the moment someone like Blair piles in and says, look, you can believe in climate change, but just not yet. Just go and get your own oil and gas, because without energy security, your economy is completely stuffed. He's right on all of those points.
So I agree completely. I think if the question is about sustainability, I flip it to where's investment opportunity? What David said earlier, how do we deliver better investment performance? Within a pension world, how do we default? How do we solve that through asset classes? Guy's 100% right. So if we need oil and gas and we have a natural resource of that, will we go into that? Will we also lean into, we need to consume more? We need to supply more energy. We need to be self-secure 100%. In that energy. So how do we do that? We get the battery stores. We get the all sorts of energy regeneration that we need to have within the UK to be self-sustained. If that's the political goal, which I believe it is, so it doesn't say sustainability, it says political goal of energy security. Completely agree with that. Therefore, asset classes that build into novel solutions as well as probably traditional solutions of oil gas, absolutely going to be good for an investor and for deployment of asset capital into those areas whilst there is opportunity. There's regulatory oversights, as Guy points out there. In food, regulatory oversights, probably in milk, as Guy knows more about this, so he can correct me and fact check me. I know nothing about what I'm talking about, but food, milk prices, supermarkets, but equally before that, the EU, milk quotas that we could produce and what's the pricing of that milk quotas came through in the 80s through to the 90s. So there's a regulatory impact of what you can charge, how much you can supply, and that builds into the pricing structure. Flip side that into energy, whatever Ofgem and the government say is the minimum amount of tariff that you can pay, equally gives that opportunity. Those things are sequential, good political direction and security, which paralleled with investment opportunity. If we know we need that energy, sure, we're going to invest in those areas that give that, based upon the regulatory security that I know that by producing that, I'm going to get a very good return for us as an asset owner, which then imparts to a consumer over the longer point in time. So I do agree sustainability, but I flip that to the broader point of where the US is, which is consider what the political direction, the need, the stuff we haven't spoken about or briefly touched upon. Technology, munitions, needs, defence. We see GDP spending ramping up in the same way that we see state pension by way of GDP doubling over a much longer period than investment in defence. But how do we invest in that as asset owners?
So for me, I think the conclusion that we are reaching from the geopolitical events that we're facing is that you need to be energy secure. It is absolutely insane that we are not extracting oil and gas from the North Sea, but we're now buying Russian oil and gas to import to this country. That is not sustainable long term. We have the highest energy costs of any economy in Europe. That is not sustainable long term. You can't imagine that your economy is going to grow, the productivity and the outcomes and the taxes will flow if you keep that longer term. So one of the consequences for asset owners, in my view, is a massive focus on energy security, which means we are going to have to make it very attractive for investors to invest in small modular reactors and in nuclear.
Correct.
And there is no doubt that is where we are headed. There are some issues in terms of infrastructure planning, regulations and judicial reviews, all of that. The most recent report, which to her credit, Rachel Reeves has adopted wholeheartedly on reforming the nuclear process, I think will make a big difference. I don't personally see this government or any future government spending more on defence to any meaningful degree. I think they talk a great game, but at the present stage, I don't see reform or the Labour government, as we presently have, spending more on that. Although, as defence is the new ESG, as they say, maybe we can see some diversion of that. And bluntly, again, asset owners will see profits to be made, but the profits will be more in things like drones and electronic warfare and things like that. So, for me, the Iran war actually is a catalyst for change, both in terms of how government approaches things. You know, it's the old Lenin line that there's, years when nothing happens and there's weeks when years happen. In my view, that is a catalyst for change in terms of energy security, in terms of defence security. But that does require government to make some really quite chunky decisions. A question, are they able to do those in the short term? I'm very doubtful.
So, Stuart, we alluded to the EU, and I think it's quite important. If the current government is saying we need to have closer links with the EU, then we've got to ask the question, why are certainly some US fund managers losing mandates in the Netherlands or in Sweden or elsewhere on the continent when they don't mention ESG, when they don't mention sustainability? I think politically, Guy knows our view at TORS on this is that the green movement is gathering pace, so is reform. If you look at the green numbers that are voting, they're voting on sustainability. So I don't know how we're going to square this circle. And certainly some of those marginals are going to be challenging. But one thing I'd appeal to the good gentleman here is that the United States today has got energy security down pat. They have got that confidence. Today, as in tomorrow, they're now talking about exploring plugging in the Gerald Ford, a US aircraft carrier, lovely aircraft carrier, very big, very chunky, biggest in the world, plugging its nuclear reactor when it pulls up at port, plugging it in and downloading a lot of that nuclear energy to a grid. Now, it's being tested in Norfolk and Virginia. That is a fantastic idea. So these are the parallels of these mini nuclear considerations that are going on. But one thing I would like to explore with everyone here is, what do we, though, do when we're baking in very expensive nuclear power? We're building Sizewell C up the road in East Anglia, and everybody's bills are getting £19 put onto it to fund that. Is that right?
Yeah, but the £19 is actually the government subsidy extracted, but to pump prime the actual bill. So, government can either just take its out of pure taxation, fine, and just say, this is the revenue pot that Treasury has, and we will subsidise things this way. Or government can say that there is a green levy. We used to do it under the coalition government with Clegg and Cameron. We did exactly that to subsidise solar and wind in all those particular ways. There was a levy on your electricity bill that basically was the subsidy to create that new market. We're doing exactly that on the nuclear power market. I don't have a problem with that because either you raise people's taxes or you borrow the money, both of which are very difficult at the moment, or you take an existing bill to utilizers, and it's meritocratic because it goes to the most amount of power that is used pays the most, whereas the least amount of power that is used pays the least. So there's a degree to which there is a fairness in the system. There is no other alternative to that because also government is really tight on the books right now. Everybody can see that for a multitude of reasons. And the practical reality is if you don't pump prime nuclear, you will not get them built. I used to have Sizewell, I used to have the lads from Cumbria, the people from North Wales come and see me and say, why is it that pension funds won't invest in this? And I would say very simply is because without a pump priming by government, pension funds will not come in. But once government does the 20%, you will have no difficulty at all populating of a long-term infrastructure bonds, nuclear funding, and that is what we're seeing.
But the point I'm raising also, Guy, is that energy prices are the highest across Europe, and here the UK still has that title of being numero uno with energy consideration. So do we plug in as a connector more thoroughly to the French sector who embrace nuclear? What I'm saying in the short term, Stuart, is can any government put an impost on an employer to pay more into a pension in this current economic environment? Can, after national insurance contributions gone up, can anybody around this table expect the employer to pay more?
Well, we've seen what's happened with employers and the growth in the market.
You're an employer.
Yeah.
Come on.
I was going to say, just back on your point, Guy, about getting pension funds involved.
Yep.
I think, and you'll need to fact check me on this. Weren't you in favour of some form of like EIS scheme for pension funds at one point?
100%. So we all can go and invest in an EIS scheme tomorrow in which we get a fantastic tax break in reality to support a growing British economy, right? I cannot comprehend why it is we don't have a 1% EIS scheme for a pension fund such that they can then invest in VC, Shoreditch. We're presently extraordinarily trendily in Shoreditch right now, in the heart of fintech country, in the heart of biotech country. And obviously, these guys need secondary funding, and none of that is happening. They're all going to the US for their secondary funding, sadly. Now, the practical reality of that is we're losing great revenue opportunities. We're losing opportunities, and often we're losing the businesses themselves. So I would be massively in favour of that. I've written articles on it. I've made that case to Treasury. I think there is a difficulty, is there not, though, that when you're doing a budget, and with giving the very shortened version, you're given things you're supposed to cut to try and help the OBR say that the books look good and calm the bond market down, and things you're supposed to subsidise and tax breaks you'd like to do. And Treasury tend to say to you, any savings that you want to make, so any tax breaks you want to make have got to be paid for by savings elsewhere. So in other words, you've got to cut your budget by X billion to pay for the Y billion of tax breaks. That's very, very hard to do if you're DWP or even if you're Treasury looking at this. I would be massively enthusiastic about a EIS for pension schemes. I think it would kickstart a new market. It would be really interesting. And the blunt truth is, I listened to Kate Bingham of SV Healthcare make a speech about 3 months ago where she made the point that not a single pension fund had invested in our healthcare business, right? That none of them are investing in biotech to any great degree whatsoever. None of them are investing in VC. None of them are investing in fintech. There are some honourable exceptions before people write in, but very, 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 very few. And one of the reasons is trustees don't like it. It's a bit speculative for them. Even if you're in a DC portfolio, it doesn't fit in with the charging structure. And genuinely, we need to change that. So any incentive that we give, like an EIS for pension schemes over 1%, would be amazing. And it would massively tick the box of the mandated principles of the Mansion House Accord that you've got to spend a certain percentage on UK infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. That's the sort of thing. And if you look at the Mansion House Accord, the bit that we kept writing into the various agreements was it is incumbent upon government to create the products for the pension funds to invest in. That is the most important part in that agreement, in my view, because bluntly, if I'm sitting at a DC Master Trust and I'm going, that's fine, show me the products though. Show me the ways in which you are making it a tax efficient or a return efficient way for me to invest. Because if you don't do that, why wouldn't I just be on a tracker run by Vanguard or other providers apply on a global market stock market tracker?
Yeah, just to pick on that, I guess what's the learning globally? You can go to Canada rather than the US for incentivizing and certain elements of investment in private market solutions. You also see from the US incentivization for saving and investment from very, very junior levels, newborns, from the Trump administration right through to the proposed Trump IRA. So maybe we need to consider what's the incentivization and consideration there. There's probably some good conferences that I know Guy's planning as well, just to tease there over what does a private market solution actually look like in future. What is the opportunity to invest in those biotechs, the new tech areas? How can we stimulate the economy domestically and go into those startups and get behind this? We've worked with capital market forums with Dame Julia Hoggett at the London Stock Exchange around productive finance, where it needs to be deployed both nationally and regionally, which is another important consideration of we do have, and Guy will talk about his former constituency in different areas of, we have different skill sets and different technology, different areas of expertise around our country that we need to be able to investing in and deploy. We're really proud as a provider that we are doing that and starting to make inroads. Any more incentivization to do that and regulatory support to do that, I think, is a good thing. So back to the positives, double down on that. There's probably more to come as well. That is teasing other areas, AI, tokenization. How do you improve investment performance? The world of today's investment and choice to consumer, bringing in David's points before around digital investments, cryptos and otherwise. JD Vance through Nigel Farage conference back in Las Vegas a year or so ago, both on stage a day apart, considering what that looks like. FCA currently reviewing that. We equally have the TPR looking at how do you support AI and where's the responsibility lie within AI. We're in a really good changing environment. Double down on our ability to be able to do that through investment, through regulatory structure. A little bit of a tease of what's coming up at future conference and possibly future conversation, but I don't think we're in a bad place.
Before we move on to a question you've posed for Guy, anything to add to that, David?
Excuse me. Look, I think the gentleman who alluded to VC and biotechs and everything like that, but let's don't leave the metal bashing behind. I'm a metal bashing investor. I do like defence stocks, and I do like what British Aerospace are doing with building the next squadrons for the German Luftwaffe. They've signed a contract, I think, yesterday, and that agreement is they actually build in that lovely airfield near Blackpool, which is fantastic. Rolls-Royce can't keep up with demand. And if you go to Canada, Mark Carney, bless him, former Bank of England governor, is saying we need to help our aerospace industry. We're close to this. We know this for a fact. But, AirAsia go to Canada and we want 114 Airbus 220s that you make here. Let's source them. So I think the critical thing is across Europe and in the UK, whether we like it or not, defence is going to be the thing to build, the thing to invest in. And whether it be Sweden, Finland, these folks are on the front line of uncertainty. And you've got to get tanks working and you've got to get new tanks going. So the bottom line for us is that does the pension industry consider investing in armaments a sustainable or an important investment instrument, or do they worry and bedwet or fret about that? Bottom line is there is a level of uncertainty that Europe has not confronted for the last 40 years, and we're short on defence. If we can only put one destroyer out, HMS Dragon, to defend the realm, that's a concern. If you've got two wonderful Queen Elizabeth class aircraft carriers, and they look superb, I've seen them from the air, wonderful. They stick out as a beautiful target. But they've got to have picket ships around them. And the picket ships are coming from the Netherlands, coming from France, coming from Denmark.
But you look at the US, so there isn't a single US ship in the Strait of Hormuz. The reason being is because that would make them a target. And it doesn't matter whether you've got all the protections in the world for your Navy. If 1,000 drones are coming towards you, it's almost impossible to stop that as a ship. But anyway, that's a separate issue necessarily. We've gone down a slight defence rabbit hole. But I mean, David is right that clearly defence stocks are going to be invested in and would be a prime source of investment longer term.
So just to wrap this up, Guy, if you were advising Donald Trump and he said we're building a super just like the Australians, how would you do it?
I think, as you know, it's like asking an Irishman for directions. You wouldn't want to start from here. I don't think necessarily Trump is the man who is going to do an Aussie super, because it is very much a left of centre creation to mandate that all citizens should have access to this. And it's very unlike Trump in the sense that there is no immediate benefit necessarily that would be seen in the polls on a longer term basis. Now, do I think it's going to happen? No, I don't. I still think it'd be a very good policy. I do think that the split way, as the UK has done it, with some contribution by individuals, some contribution by employers, is a good way, because it tends to be more acceptable in my view. The Australian system of mandatory from the employer is hard graft, because they're paying 12%. That's a hell of a hike to be trying to ask Americans to then be paying for those 50% who are totally uninvested at the present stage. So I just don't see that the way forward is being the Australian style. But having a mandatory system that does take it forward with a split way as in the UK is, in my view, the way ahead. The great adage from Australia is they are amazing at accumulation, but really, really poor at decumulation. And to be fair to the Americans, you look at the growth of target date funds there, you look at the ways in which there is a massive IFA market that really, really is focused on how you get a decumulated product for your individual 50% of the population who do have a 401k. That is the way ahead, definitely. So they are, the Americans are virtually leading the world in decumulation, in my view. We're doing a pretty good job, but we could do better.
Brilliant.
Mike?
Just a final point on which Guy touched upon in the Pension Commission, decumulation. What does it look like? We're building what those solutions look like. I do think, and I agree with you, Guy, we have a number of those solutions already available to market. Let's not go too. That's one that I say. Let's not actually go too early. Let's meet what a consumer actually wants, whether it's advised, guided, and we need to have enough data to be able to provide what solutions look like. Whatever we produce as a default, if we were to default what decumulation or pension income looks like, will not be the same next year as it will be in 5 years' time, because we will have more data, more solutions to be able to suggest what those are for consumers, whether they're advised or guided. So I do agree. The Pension Commission and the industry can take time on that and not over-index on it. The American philosophy there of having freedom, having choice, having the ability to determine what you want to do for yourself and your family, behaviourally and financially, I think is the key impact. So let's not rush the back end of this. Let's make sure that there's solutions, but let's double down and laser focus on the front end of it, which is the pension savings aspect and how that aligns with broader savings, broader appetite, and fundamentally to David's earlier point, which is making sure the assets are working effectively and in line with clear legislative direction that gives, and I'll use better outcomes, better performance, and a better country that we're building to be able to achieve that hand in hand, which I believe is positive and we can achieve.
Stuart, thank you for that question, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today. It's great and to be with such esteemed colleagues. To pick up on my good friend Guy's point about Donald Trump, Donald Trump's already said he admires the Australian superannuation system. He
A little, David, a little.
Yeah, and he didn't say I admire the UK auto enrolment system. He said I admire the Australian superannuation system, and quote, he's going to do it better. Now, I personally don't think he fully understood the nuances
I think
of
what
the
he
system.
what he had liked about it was the amount of funds that were in the Aussie supers that were then buying bits of infrastructure in all parts of the world. That's the bit he likes about it. He likes the end product, not necessarily the journey.
Jesus, Mary and the wee donkey guy. Come on, let's be reasonable here. We're not going to try to mind read Donald Trump's views on Australia, but what I would say, Stuart, and it's important to note here, and the gentleman who raised the issue, is that retirement income saving is critical in the United States, and they are offering panels and they are doing innovation. But already, the field of dreams argument, if you build something, they shall come. Well, not necessarily. We've seen this with deferred annuitisation all around the world. Products have been built all around the world on deferred annuities, and they just haven't come. And like, I would argue that we've got to be very careful and mindful of the retirement income concentration. What do we want? Remember, more and more British people are worried about living too long than dying too soon. And how do we address that issue? And it's the financial services entities and industry that rely on that, but it's also politicians who are going to grasp the thorny nettle of this issue and grasp it hard. And what I would say, though, in praise to what the Trump administration is trying to do, is they are grasping. They are trying to take on board some of the deficiencies of previous administrations and address it. And I think relying on target date funds, relying on default, yes. But still, today, 50% of working Americans are not covered by any retirement savings solution. That's a high number, Stuart. And then it comes back to Social Security. Social Security becomes the buttress. And if Social Security has got a funding issue in the future, it gets all tricky. But thank you again.
No, well, thank you all. There's a lot for asset owners to unpack here today. Thanks for sharing your insights, Mike, David, Guy. If you want to come and hear these gentlemen speak a bit more, we are hosting the Private Markets event on the 30th of June at Stationers Hall. Hit the link in the show notes and grab your place. Thank you.